Good morning, everyone. We are just going to give folks another 1 minute to hop on, and then we will go ahead and get started just to make sure we can get through everything. The chat is disabled just so that you know, but the Q&A is active. So if you have any questions, please put a question in the Q&A and Sonia and I will respond to it. All right, we have almost 80 people with us, so I think we can go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. My name is Beth Nuttall. I am the Director of Grants and Programs at CFVI. I have been with CFVI for over 6 years, and I'm also joined by my colleague, Sonia. Sonia, do you want to introduce yourself?
Good morning. I'm so happy that we have so many on this webinar. I am Sonia Barnes Moorhead. I'm the Vice President for Development and Capacity Building at CFVI, and I have been on board for over a year, but have had decades of experience in philanthropic endeavors. So,
Awesome. Thank you.
and Beth is going to take the lead on this, and I will be here to answer questions and add anything that comes up. So thank you, Beth.
Awesome. Thanks, Sonia. Yes, and as I mentioned for everyone, the chat is off, but the Q&A is on. So if you have a question or a comment or anything, Sonia will be monitoring those. So please go ahead and put them in. It looks like, Sonia, there's a couple questions on there. Audio and video should be on. So you should be able to hear us and you should be able to see my screen currently. We are recording as well, so everyone that registered will get a recording of the webinar. So Sonia and I introduced ourselves, and I just also wanted to give a huge thank you to UVI Cell for letting us use their template for this presentation. It was very helpful. So Chinwe, if you are on, thank you so much. All right, so the upcoming grant application from the Popular VI Community Fund is going to be opening on October 1. The application period will be open from October 1 through October 31, and we're estimating that once the grants are selected, they would be awarded in December. The period of performance is January 1 of next year through December 31. So keep that in mind as you're thinking about programs that you would want to be applying for. It's not required that it be a 12-month program, but I would say it's encouraged that it's a longer program, more than just a month or two. That's more of what we're looking for. The grant amount can be up to $10,000 each. It doesn't mean you have to request 10,000, it's just up to. So if you only needed a couple thousand, 5,000, whatever it might be, you are welcome to only apply for that amount as well. We are looking for projects that provide direct services in the areas of youth education, youth economic empowerment, so that would be vocational training or employment support, or environmental projects. The youth education projects should be looking at improving academics or promoting youth to stay in school. The economic empowerment projects should be supporting employment and/or vocational training. And the environmental projects must be focused on environmental work in the community. The project should be focused on supporting children, youth, and families in the US Virgin Islands and/or the British Virgin Islands. So eligibility for this grant is going to be for nonprofit organizations with a 501c3 status. So that's your status with the IRS. Fiscally sponsored organizations. So maybe you use a fiscal sponsor at a 501c3 organization that would be eligible. Churches and nonprofits in the British Virgin Islands. For any folks on from the BVI, just keep in mind that we would be collecting some additional information from you all just to verify the nonprofit status in the BVI. Events are not allowed, so this kind of goes back to, we don't want to support just a one-time event or a short-term project. And any applications from an organization with reports past due to us will not be considered. So if you have received any grants from us recently, you can always log on to the portal and check your account to make sure that everything looks good. I do also reach out to everyone if you have an overdue report, but you're also welcome to reach out to me directly. And applicants are limited to no more than 2 consecutive awards from this fund. So this is our third cycle, I believe, with this grant. And so if you received a grant the past 2 times, you would not be eligible for this third round. Okay, so the agenda for what we're going to be going over today, we'll be looking at the grant proposal component, so the different elements that make up the application, budget preparation, how you craft a detailed and realistic budget, compliance and regulations. That language is a lot more to do with federal stuff, but every grant has specific requirements that you need to follow. Writing techniques, reviewing and editing your proposal, common pitfalls and mistakes, and post-submission, what happens after you submit. Okay, so I dropped the request for proposals, also known as the RFP, into the chat. And anyone who had registered before this morning would have gotten an email from me as well with the RFP. I can drop it in again if anyone is having trouble finding it. I can do that in a little bit, but I will also follow up again once we've closed out with the recording and a copy of the RFP. But these are just the different components that make up a typical request for proposals. We try to keep it straightforward and short, but if you have ever applied for a federal grant, they can be very, very long and complicated as well. But it always has all the information that you need. So we always encourage you to read in detail everything in the RFP. So it will include the overview information, just what the funding is, about the organization, potentially about the funder that's going through the organization as well, a description of the funding opportunity, so what they are looking to be funding, award information, so how much the award might be, information on eligibility, which is what we just went over, so you can determine if you can apply or not, application and submission information, so any details that you need to know about what goes into the application, and also like deadlines, things like that, and the submission information, when it is due and how you would submit it. For us, we use a grant portal online, so we do not accept any paper applications, mailed in applications, emailed applications. Everything has to go through our grant portal. And it includes information on application review. This, I think, is a really important one that folks should always look at, especially if it includes any evaluation criteria. So you can know exactly what is being reviewed and the components that you should focus on. And it will include other information like who to contact. Now we'll go over the application narrative elements. So we're going to go over all of the questions that are listed in this application and kind of what we're looking for each of them. The application is currently visible through the grant portal as well. You can't submit it yet, not until October 1 when it opens, but you can preview it. So if you have an account, you can preview through your account, and you don't have to have an account as well. You can also go to our website, cfvi.net, go to the grants page, and then there's a link for available opportunities. And you can also preview it through there without having an account. So the first question is pretty standard. It's your organization's mission. So what is your mission statement of the organization? Many times this can just be a copy and paste, especially if you have your mission listed on your website. So you don't have to think too hard about that. History, describe the history and past achievements of the organization. So here we're just looking to see how long has this organization been around? What have been your successes so far? Things that you would like to highlight for the reviewers to show how successful your organization has already been. Especially if you have done this project that you're applying for previously, you would want to include information about that. If it's a new project, you could let us know that, but if you've done it before, definitely include information on how it went, maybe things that you knew you needed to improve based on that, and now you can work towards that. We just want to know, are you a long-standing organization and or have you had success with types of projects like this already? Project description. This is just going to be a really brief summary of the project. So you want to kind of keep this for a really wide audience. Sometimes the reviewers are not going to be super familiar with niche projects, especially maybe environmental terms, things that are more scholarly. You want to keep it in pretty general language so that anyone who reads it can understand just from reading your summary what is going to take place. The work plan, this is really important, and it's important that you include all of the elements here that we're going to go over. We're looking for detail in this response, so you'll be including your timeline and planned activities. Many times I'll see kind of a month-by-month timeline. That's great. That's really helpful, you know, and it can be January through February, we're doing XYZ. And then the next 4 months, we're doing XYZ. However, what you want to break down the timeline, but that's really helpful for us to see what exactly is taking place. Maybe any goals you have that tie into the timeline. And we want to see what you intend to accomplish by specific dates. So maybe you have a goal of, you know, having 20 people registered by a certain date or signed up for a program, whatever it might be. We want to know about those. We want to know that you've thought through the details of the program. And if you were to be awarded, you could just get up and running right away. And then you should also be identifying any major milestones for the project. So there might be some smaller goals that you're looking for, but maybe, you know, your kind of overall goal is to reach 50 youth. Whatever that might be, whatever it looks like for your project, we want to know what those are. The next one is staffing. So we're looking for you to describe the experience and qualifications of the staff. So many times you might not have staff hired yet, which is totally fine, but we do want to see maybe you have a title for the position that you will be hiring or contracting and what exactly they would be doing and what kind of qualifications you're looking for when you're going to be hiring that individual. If you do already have people in place, we want to know what their title is, what their experience is that makes them qualified to have the role that you're describing in this project. And this is just to help us know and understand who is going to be running the different elements of a program. Have they done it before? Do they have experience with this? Just to strengthen the application, because if you have someone brand new who has never done anything like this before without any support, that might be a little bit of a red flag. But if you have individuals with 20 plus years of experience, they've run these programs every year, that's a great thing that you want to highlight. All right, continuing on. Problem addressed, and this should say problems addressed because it could be multiple problems as well. But we want to know what is the problem or the thing that your project will address. So there's some kind of reason that you want to do this project. Maybe you want to help youth get training in construction trade, or maybe you want to just help with tutoring. Whatever it might be, there's a reason behind why you want to run this project, and we want to know what is that problem that you're addressing. It's helpful if you can to include data about the problem rather than just stating this is a problem and this is why we're addressing it. We want to know, well, how do you know that's a problem? Is there something you looked at, a report, some kind of data to show that this is a problem and it's important that it be addressed with your project. Addressing the problem is the next question. So how does your project address the problem that you just talked about in the previous response? So the previous one is just describing the problem that you're addressing and explaining why it's a problem that needs to be addressed. Now this addressing the problem is talking about how your specific program is addressing the problem that you just talked about. And we would like to see specifics, so be as detailed as you can in this response. Expected results. What are the results and the impact, so short and or long term, that you expect your project to have? We love to see numbers, kind of hard facts and figures. As an example I used earlier, you want to impact 50 youth, whatever it might be. We want to know that you have a goal and that you're working towards that, and what the impact of your program is going to be. It can be short or it can be a long-term impact, but we just want to know, why is this project important? And if we were to fund it, what would the impact look like? And that kind of helps the reviewers understand how important this project might be to the community. Program target. So we would like to know, who will your project serve? And you can include information on how your project includes any underserved populations if it's applicable. We are looking for more of a specific response here. So we would like to know if there are specific communities that are being served. If it is an underserved population, what kind of underserved population? We just want to know who this program specifically is targeting and who you're looking to support. Next question is sustainability. And in saying this, we do understand that, oftentimes you're just applying for one grant for 12 months and then you kind of get towards the end and you're applying to other funding to continue it. We just want to know what your plan is. If you want to sustain this project in the future, what is your plan? And an acceptable response to that might just be, we're going to continue applying for grant funding. Or maybe you're seeking donors, something like that. We just want to get a bit of an understanding of what your plan is if you do want to sustain the project in the future. Evaluation. How will you evaluate the impact of your project, and was it successful? So going back to the impact question, where you might have included numbers, like we want to support 50 individuals, then your evaluation is thinking about, okay, how do we know if this was a successful program? We put on the program for 12 months or however long, we get to the end, we're looking back and reviewing it. How would we know that it was successful? So when you're thinking about the work plan and the different goals along the way, you would tie back to those goals that you mentioned, maybe any milestones if you had those, and say, if we met goals XYZ, then we would know it was successful. Just generally overall thinking about how you're going to evaluate your project as a whole. Volunteer opportunities. So this one is specific to Popular because they do like to share opportunities with their employees, and they have employees in the USVI and the BVI. So we just want to know here any volunteer opportunities that might be available for Banco Pop employees if you were to be funded. It could be, fairly general. It could be if you don't have anything specific. You can just think of some examples of things that might be an option. When we get to the awarding stage and if you are selected, we then would connect you with the Banco Pop team and you could kind of talk together to figure out what might work for both of you so that you can get some volunteers and that the employees can get out into the community and help. And the last question for the narrative piece is additional information. This is not required. Pretty much all the other questions will be required, but this is just optional. So maybe there's just additional information that you want to provide about the program that you weren't able to address elsewhere. And again, that one's optional. Okay, proposal budget. So this is a pretty big piece. The budget projects how much it will cost to carry out the plans that were described in the narrative. So all of those previous questions, we're now putting it in number format. So it's an estimate of the costs for conducting all of these future activities. What should it contain? There should be line items for each of your expected expense categories. So these are just some examples that we see usually across the board. So personnel, which would be if you have staff that are putting time towards it, you would use personnel. Consultants, maybe you're hiring a contractor to do some work for this program. Supplies, any kind of materials and supplies that you would need. Equipment is going to be really big purchases. So if it's like an item that's more than $5,000, that would be considered equipment. And transportation, maybe it's field trips, so you need to include the cost of taxis or buses to get folks from A to B. These are just some examples, but you would want to think through every category that you're going to be needing money for. And when you're including, personnel and consultants, you also want to talk about the hourly rate or the number of hours that the individual will be working. Many people use spreadsheets, but you can really use whatever is easiest for you. It can be a Word document, it can be a PDF, as long as everything is broken down and it's easy for us to see and understand, that's fine. The format is really up to you. For the budget narrative, so this is a really critical piece that I think often is misunderstood. So the narrative is a narrative that is justifying and explaining the expenses that were listed in your budget. So we need to know, why are these expenses necessary? Why do you need this specific piece of equipment? Why do you need this transportation? Why do you need to hire this individual? Some of it might seem really obvious, but we still would like to see it written out. Oftentimes we have questions about why an expense would be needed. And there's nothing that we can refer back to, and we won't be able to reach out to you for additional information sometimes because we want to be fair to everybody. So we're only reviewing on what we receive. So just make sure in the narrative section, you're explaining and justifying why you included all these expenses, why they're necessary to the completion of the project, and also how you calculated each of the costs. So ideally, especially if you're buying a bunch of materials, supplies, equipment, things like that, how do you know how much this is going to cost? You should be looking at quotes, checking online to get like an average cost that you would expect to pay for something. So we want to know what you did to calculate each of the costs and why they're necessary. And the next question is other funding. And this is just us wanting to know if there is a gap in funding. Maybe you're applying for, 10,000, but the whole program is a $50,000 program, something like that. If we are saying, okay, well, we would award them 10,000, but then there's a $40,000 gap and we have no idea how they would cover that. This is for this question. So maybe you already have funding. Maybe you already have 40,000 to cover most of the program, but you're missing the 10,000. And you can explain that in this question. Say we already have the 40,000 received or awarded from another organization or wherever it might be. And what if we were to get this 10,000, then that would close our gap. Okay, so the development process for the budget. This is going to be a little bit repetitive, but we just want to kind of hop on the budget narrative, all the pieces, because this is where we often see the biggest mistakes and just lack of information. So your preliminary budget work. So you'll want to think about the overall cost range of the project. If you know you're going in and you want to request 10,000, you need to kind of work backwards and think about, okay, what are going to be the expenses that we need? Gather all the information to know what the different expenses might be. If this is a program you've done already, you pretty much would already have this information. But if it's a new program, you might need to do some research or maybe even reach out to another organization who's done something similar, and you can get an understanding from them about the cost. Estimating. So this goes back to kind of when you're building your budget and you have the budget narrative and you're explaining how you calculated your costs. We want to know what the estimate of each of these costs are. So you want to break them down. You don't want to just say materials and supplies, $3,000. That's not helpful because we have no idea what you're buying, right? We're like $3,000 for materials. What does that mean? So we want to know, is it T-shirts, is it notebooks, backpacks, books, whatever it might be for your program. You want to have the materials and supplies as the kind of umbrella group. And within that, break it down into the actual items that you're going to be buying. And again, include your cost estimates for each of them. So maybe it's T-shirts for kids in a program, 50 T-shirts at $25 each. Whatever the price might be and the number, you want to include that kind of information. Okay, proposal mistakes. So these are just kind of some of the bigger mistakes or more common mistakes, I should say, that we will often see. The first one is that the request is not of interest to the funder. So this goes back to reading the request for proposals, the RFP in detail, to understand what it is exactly that the funder is looking for. And sometimes I would also recommend that you look back for what they've previously funded. So there's probably going to be a press release somewhere. For us, you could go on our website and you could search around for previous press releases for the popular grants. And you can see what was previously funded, because that's going to give you a good idea of what was successful. If there's a request that comes in and it really is not connected to what we're looking for, it's not even going to make it to the review committee stage. The second one is the problem is not well defined, documented, or understandable. And this kind of just goes back to each of the different elements in the narrative. You're just talking about the problem, how you know it's a problem, what you're addressing, your timeline, your goals, and that it's all kind of in layman's terms. It's very general language that anyone could understand no matter what their experience is. The third is that staff responsibilities and time commitment are not explained. So sometimes when you're looking at that staffing question, we will see just very generic information that's really not helpful. Like I mentioned before, we want to see, the title of the individuals that are going to be running the program, responsible for different pieces of it, how much time they're going to be putting in, and what their experience is that makes them qualified to do that role. The fourth one is missing or incomplete answers to questions. So this is really just about kind of reviewing everything that you have written in response to each of the questions and making sure that you've answered what the question was actually asking. And the last one is that the objectives do not match the problem statement and are not specific or measurable. So this is tying back to the impact question, the evaluation question. So we want to know specific numbers, whether it's, number of individuals, a percentage of a population, whatever it might be that applies to your program. We do want specific things that can be measured and then tied into your evaluation when you're looking at the impact of the program and whether it was successful or not. Use of jargon or abbreviations or buzzwords. So again, just make sure that all the language is very general. I know oftentimes we kind of work in these like niche fields. So we think, oh, everyone knows the acronym for that. They don't. Once you get out into the wider world, especially with reviewers who have a wide range of experience, they're not going to know what acronyms mean. They might not know specific jargon that's used depending on the field that you're working in. Oftentimes I see things in the environmental world where I'm like, I'm really not sure what that means, but we're not going to go and research what it means because that should be either provided in the application or it should be made to be more general so that everyone can understand it. The budget is not substantiated by the narrative. Items are not explained. and or costs for budget items are inaccurate or inflated. So just going back to when you're thinking about your budget, developing your budget, explaining how you got the cost for each of the items, and justifying why they are required for this program, especially if something might seem high to the average person. Maybe you need to buy like an online subscription to an educational service, and it's like $6,000. We and reviewers would look at that and be like, ooh, that's a really significant portion of the $10,000 budget. That seems like maybe it's too high. But if you can justify why you need that specific service, why it's critical to the success of this project, then that's really helpful for reviewers. And sometimes that's fine, you know, and you would talk about the research that you did to find the right subscription that would make this project a success. The evaluation is only a summary and lacks details. So this is just going back to being specific and measurable. We want to know that you looked back and said, okay, great. We said we were going to impact 30 individuals. Now we're at the end and we actually helped 50 individuals. So we know that was a success. So we just want, when you're looking at your evaluation, for you to be specific rather than just being very generic, like, oh, well, we will help a specific population. That's very general and not giving us much information. We would like to know numbers, percentages, things like that. The proposal is not structurally clear. I think this is less of an issue with our system just because we have all of the questions laid out that we want answers to, and they are all required questions. But, you know, if you're creating a proposal from scratch in like a Word document, just make sure everything is organized and it can be understood. Again, the general terms, and that it's in order and just very organized. So it doesn't, you read it and you're like, what? I don't really understand what they're doing because the pieces don't match up. Again, I feel like this is less of an issue with our system just because we have the questions all laid out in order that we want to see them. And the last one is the so what question is not addressed. So this is really going back to identifying the problem that your program is addressing and how your program is going to address it and the importance of it. So if we've read a whole proposal and we're like, okay, well, that sounds like a fun program, but so what? Like, why would we fund it? Because we have no idea what the impact's going to be. You know, we just don't really understand the importance of this program. So the problems addressed question is where you really want to justify that. Okay, reviewing and editing. This one, we just really wanted to kind of reiterate the importance of, you know, you've written a whole proposal and going back and reviewing it. Sometimes I find it really helpful to have multiple people help you with something like that. You know, maybe you've been working in a dark room for hours, writing out your proposal, and you kind of, your eyes start to glaze over it, right? You might miss little typos or things that don't make sense anymore. So maybe if you have a colleague or someone who's familiar with the program that you're doing, or actually they might not even need to be familiar with the program, that might be better now that I'm thinking out loud. So that they can read it and say, yeah, I understand what you're doing. It all makes sense. They can flag any typos that you might have. And also ChatGPT is a great tool. I use it. I think Sonia uses it sometimes, just for things like checking for typos or grammar, even, you know, super simple things like that. Especially after you've spent however long, you know, hours writing something out, you can just kind of copy paste it into ChatGPT, say check for typos, check for grammar, something like that. And it will send it back to you and then, you know, read through it, of course. But we find it pretty helpful for something like that. And I'll also say that ChatGPT can be really helpful for helping to brainstorm ideas or just come up with new things that maybe you hadn't thought about. It's not a service where you ever just want to copy paste without reviewing, because it's never factually correct. Just know that. But it's a helpful tool for kind of getting a base template. Sonia, did you have anything to add for this?
I just want to add in, it is a wonderful tool, and if you can think of it also as a copy editor, one of the things that's important, as we all know, is to get a proposals, and there are a lot of typos and a lot of grammatical errors, and ChatGPT really is very helpful in using it as a copy editor. So just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's free. As of right now, it's free. That might change in the future. I don't know. But you just set up your account and it's a free tool. And, it can even be helpful for things like drafting emails. I sometimes use it to help, think through things like that. So it's not frowned upon from us as long as you are just using it as kind of a tool in your toolbox rather than just copying and pasting a whole proposal. All right, just some nuances to be aware of if you are awarded a grant and now you are in the management stage of it. Reporting deadlines. So this would be already listed in the RFP document, but you definitely want to make sure that you would write down the due dates of the reports. For us, the reports are always due in our online grant system called Foundant. The system also sends you automated reminders about when the reports are due, but it's always good to just have those deadlines written down for yourself somewhere so that you're not submitting something late. Budget and approved expenses. This is a big one. So let's say you're awarded a grant and the grant agreement is going to have the approved budget attached to it. We are expecting that you are following this approved budget. So you're not adding a new category without running it by us. Even if you've overspent significantly in one area, you should be notifying us that that's happening before it happens, ideally. We try to be pretty flexible with modifications. A lot of that depends on the funding source. So if we're thinking about a federal grant, we're going to be very restricted in what we could do. But with something a bit more flexible, like Popular funding, we can sometimes modify the budgets more than we would with a federal grant. But just be mindful that, if anything comes up that's going to change the budget as it was approved, you should be reaching out to us and to any funder for any grant that you're managing to get prior approval before making any of those changes. If it's like a $10 change, that's fine. You don't have to let us know. My general rule of thumb is if it's going to affect a 10% change in the budget, so 10% of the total grant amount, 10% of 10,000, whatever it might be, then you should be reaching out to the funder before making any decisions. Period of performance. So this is the period of activity where you're going to be putting on the program, submitting your reports, and spending down the money. That's really the biggest piece, is the money piece. You must have spent all of the money by the end of the period of performance. So for this grant, it's December 31 of 2025. We expect that all money is spent by then. You don't have $20 left over. You don't have $100 left over. You have no money left over by December 31. Now, if you're moving along and maybe 6 months into the project, you're submitting the interim report to us and you realize, oh, we have really underspent on this one area for whatever reason. We might need some additional time to spend down the money, or we might want to, put it towards something else. Reach out to us. We'll work with you on any changes that you can make, any extensions that we can potentially provide. We want you to be successful and to spend all the money, get all the money. So we will do what we can to help you with that, but it's critical that you reach out to us or any funder if you need any adjustments to the budget period. And prior approval requirements. Again, this is kind of going back to the budget and the approved expenses. The 10% rule is a pretty good rule that's based off of a lot of federal grants that we manage. But just generally, I think it's better to be cautious. So if you have any kind of major change to your budget or even to the program. You have some staff that were really key staff and they've left and now you have to get new people. You should be letting us know. And as for budget changes, if you need to change something, this is when the prior approval requirements would come in. Some funders will have specific things where you need to get prior approval, especially federal grants. So changes in key personnel is a big one. Changes to your budget of more than 10%. And changes to like the general scope of the program. If you kind of have to rethink the program for whatever reason, you have to reach out to the funder to talk about that first before proceeding. All right, identifying and utilizing resources for guidance. So these are just the things that you can always reference if you need additional information. The grant agreement is a great one. Oftentimes I feel like it's a lot of kind of jargon language and people don't really read it and they just sign it and say, great, okay, we have a grant. It happens, it's okay. Well, it's not okay, but it does happen. You should be reading everything in the grant agreement. There's a lot of very important information. For example, the prior approval requirements might be listed in there, any reporting due dates, your period of performance, things like that. But you can always reference back to the grant agreement if you had a question about something before reaching out. Another one is your approved budget. We attach the budget to the end of our grant agreements. So that's kind of the same document. But if you're, moving along and you're like, oh, I wonder how much we got approved for in this specific line item, you can always look back at the grant agreement and that will have the budget at the end of it. The grantor website and any handbooks or tools. So you can always check back to the CFBI website for when we do press releases, when we issue the RFPs. That's going to have a lot of helpful information. We don't typically have handbooks. Some funders do, or different tools. Primarily the tool for us would be the online grant portal, because you can always log in and access your account there. You can see any grant that you've ever applied for with us, whether it was awarded or not, reports that were due. We also upload all of the paperwork, so the grant agreement, the budget, the award letters, any kind of miscellaneous information. If we do an amendment to the grant, that document's going to be in there. So it's always just good to kind of look around those different websites and tools. And then the last one is the RFP. Again, make sure you read the RFP in detail. I believe ours is only 2 or 3 pages. It's not super long, but it has all the information that you would need to know in it. And contact information, of course. So if you've read through the whole thing and you still have questions, please feel free to reach out to us and we will help you. Evaluating and monitoring your project. So as you're moving along in your program, you really should be having a pretty frequent check-in to see how everything's going, especially when it comes to your budget. Maybe you're just managing it in spreadsheets, that's fine, but make sure you do it at least monthly so you can keep a current idea of what's going on and any issues that you might need to address. That way you can reach out to us ahead of time. Reporting grant activity. So going into this, you've seen the RFP, you already know when the reports are due. You can also log into the system once the grant has been awarded and see the report templates ahead of time. So that will help you know what exactly you have to report on. So if you do that when you start out, then you know exactly what kind of information you need to be tracking so that you can then report back on it for your reports. Keeping proper records. This is critical, especially for any expenses, because it is possible that at any time you might be required to submit receipts, expense reports, things like that. So it's critical that you keep your proper records for everything and you keep them organized so that if a funder needed to reach out and get copies, you could easily pull that. It's always better to just be prepared rather than having to kind of scramble and find things afterwards. And then you can enjoy a successful closeout. You've submitted all your reports, everything was spent as it was intended to, and then it gets closed out and you can move on and we can shout out how awesome you were. So just some key takeaways. The most successful funding requests combine a well-defined problem with a well-defined approach to addressing that problem. So we talked about it already, but just having the specific and measurable things, and also explaining the problem that you're talking about and tying it to any data maybe that would be helpful for us to understand and know why it's a problem. Viewing the narrative as an argument, I often get so many questions of, well, could this program qualify as that? Could it qualify as this? And, sometimes I can help you have like a firm answer, but a lot of the times it's up to you to make the argument in your proposal as to why or how it qualifies as a youth education, youth empowerment project. So really just viewing your narrative as an argument in general, including the budget narrative where you're talking about, why these expenses are needed. Generally speaking, the narrative justifies the necessity of each item required to accomplish project goals, and the budget justifies the cost of those items. So again, we've talked about this, but this is just one of those major takeaways that you are in your argument, you're justifying everything in your budget, especially. And maybe those budget items can also tie specifically to goals that you want to accomplish. An example could be you need to buy a education subscription software because your whole program is an online education program for kids. So obviously, that would be required, but explain that. Don't just assume that a reviewer is going to fully understand that. Be concise and to the point. We do have character limits on our forms, so just be mindful of those. And this is another thing that ChatGPT can help with. Maybe you've written out an amazing response, but it's too many characters. You can kind of copy it into ChatGPT, say, please revise this to X amount of characters. And it does a pretty good job. Obviously, you need to review it, make sure it's still accurate, but it is helpful for that. And utilize all resources and follow regulations and laws to efficiently manage a grant project. So again, just looking back at the grant agreement, the reports, any requirements around the funding, the approved budget, everything like that, to make sure that you are managing it appropriately. All right, so that may have been a lot of information, but hopefully helpful information. Sonia, I think you've answered a few questions in the chat. Are there any that were kind of frequent that you want to mention?
Been frequent. I want to thank you all for the questions. They were great. I think one question that came up that and I'm sure everyone can see the answers to the, as I was typing, and forgive me for my typos. That's why ChatGPT and Grammarly are very good. Has to do with a question somebody raised in reference to when they're submitting a budget, if they, for example, for a new staff person, for an ongoing program, if they should show 1 year, if they should show the budget for the entire program or just for that specific position. And I flag this as a really good budget question. It's really important for us to see the big picture. Regardless if you're just applying for one particular portion of your larger budget, it really gives the reviewers an opportunity to see really what this program is about and where does this one $10,000 request fit into it. So excellent question. And yes, please show the entirety of the program that you're applying for. And I think the other question somebody raised was whether or not we can share this PowerPoint presentation with them. And absolutely, we can get this out to you all. Oh, I see there are 3 more questions in the chat. Are matching funds required? No, it's not a matching program. Could you submit more than one application per grant cycle? Well, Beth, you want to answer, because we only have one cycle for this grant. Correct?
Yeah, so if you wanted to submit more than one application for this specific grant opportunity, sure, there's no restrictions around that. I would just make sure that the two projects are, you know, like very different projects and that they would need to be separate applications. And also keep in mind, we do get a lot of applications. So, yeah, there's no rule against it though.
And I know a couple of people asked that question, and I recommended one, but just because of that reason that we get so many applicants. So
Yeah, so maybe if you're, you know, you have two programs that you're thinking about applying for, maybe just apply for the one that you think is stronger and has a better chance. But, you know, it's totally up to you all. You can definitely submit to if you want to. All right. Oh, hi, Sophia. Can the recording, once available, be shared with other members that did not register because they could not attend? Absolutely. Yeah, we will email it to everyone that registered because that's how we have your email address. You can feel free to forward it to anyone that you think it could be helpful for. I think we'll probably also put it on the website for a little bit, just so that it's up there. Because we just want this to be kind of like a helpful tool and resource that you can refer back to for really any grant application. Obviously, this one is specific to the Popular grant. But yes, definitely. Where can you get a copy of the RFP? So there is one in the chat. And if you registered before this morning, I sent it out. I can drop it in there again right now. Let me do that. There it is. And we will do a press release when the application opens. So that will be October 1. So you'll also see it then. Is there evaluation at the end of the cycle only or first submitted, first evaluated? I'm not sure I understand that question. Sonia, do you understand that question?
is there evaluation at the end of the cycle only? Yeah, or first submitted for. If I understand the question correctly, I think you're asking if there evaluation at the end of the cycle. So you have to submit an evaluation as to the impact of the funding. If that's your question, please clarify though.
All right, and the maximum amount that you can request is 10,000. You can request up to 10,000. It doesn't have to be 10,000, it can be less than that, but 10 is the max. Please provide the URL for the website. Definitely, cfbi.net. There we go. Can a church without 501c3 serve as a fiscal sponsor? Sonia, I see you're typing. That is an interesting question. I would have to know more, I think, because churches typically kind of get an automatic exemption from the IRS just because of, you know, being a church and what you do. I don't know if you could be a fiscal sponsor though. That's probably something you would need to research on your own. Is there a final report form? Yes, there is an interim report and a final report. The dates are both listed on the RFP. And if you were to be awarded a grant, you would also have access to them immediately in the grant portal. So you could log in and just see all the questions that you will have to answer and the documents that you will have to provide. So there is a template for each of them. We only want them submitted in the grant portal. We don't want, you know, a Word document emailed to us, things like that. We do ask that you do everything in the portal just because we have a lot of grants. October is the open period. If I submit on October 2nd, would it be evaluated on the 3rd or only after the period is over and all grant requests are evaluated? So no, if you can submit anytime between October 1 and 31, it doesn't mean that you're going to move up ahead of time and be evaluated sooner. When everything closes on October 31, then we do an internal review. and then it moves to an external review, and everyone goes at the same time. If first come, first serve isn't really what we do for this situation. What are the reporting requirements during the grant, quarterly, and final reports? So if you look at the RFP that I just dropped into the chat, it will tell you. But there is an interim report due 6 months into the project, and then a final report due 15 days after the end of the period of performance. So that would be January 15 of 2026. Okay. So I get slowed down for a minute, but if anyone has any questions, please do drop them in and we can answer them. I'll also just go to our next slide, just because this is our contact information. You are always welcome to email me directly, and Sonia, we will help you as quickly as we can. You know, if you do have questions, I would encourage you to reach out sooner and not, you know, a couple days before the deadline, because at that point we're probably inundated with questions and we might not be able to get back to you in time. How are 501c organizations processed? So if you want to become a 501c3 organization, you would need to apply through the IRS. I would encourage you to look at the IRS's website, and they will give you all the information you need on how to apply for that. Cheryl, I'm not sure I understand your question. If you're a 501c3 already, then you're an eligible applicant, and that just means that you can apply for this grant opportunity. If you have another question, please do clarify. Thank you, Donnelly. Yes, we hope that this has been helpful. We're hoping and planning to be doing more of these in the future now that we have a little bit more capacity internally. And yeah, we want everyone to be successful and to kind of grow and strengthen your proposals that you're submitting, not only to us, but to everyone. So we are here to help as much as we can.
And Beth, may I interrupt from
Oh,
beyond?
sure. Hey, Dee.
I'm a ghost host. Good morning, everyone. But because of that, I couldn't put a question in the Q&A. And I just wanted to use this as an opportunity, because we've had such a robust attendance, to let people know about the grant interest form on CFEI's website, which doesn't have anything to do with this particular grant application, but I just wanted folks to know that there are other ways to let us know about their interests and the work that they're doing. Thank you.
Thanks, Dee.
Thanks, Dee. There's a couple more questions that came in. Is it okay if it's a shorter time span than a year? Absolutely. You're not required to have a project that runs the entire period from January to December, but we generally are looking for longer term projects. So, you know, if you have something that's only running a couple weeks, a month, even 2 months, I would maybe reconsider and think about how you could make that a more successful and long-term program. Can a company apply for a grant to purchase t-shirts as a fundraiser? No, so a company would not, like a business is not going to be eligible really ever for any funding from CFEI, because we support nonprofits specifically. But you know, if you're running a program and maybe there's a local business, you can always reach out to them, you know, outside of CFEI. It doesn't have anything to do with us, but you could reach out to that company and ask if they would give you a reduced rate as a nonprofit, or even if they would just kind of want to sponsor your program by providing you free t-shirts. Many businesses are open to that. Thank you, Gail. Wow, 40 questions. That's great. All right, I know we are at time. So I think we'll, if there's any more questions, please drop them in. We might hang out for kind of a couple minutes to answer anything else. But thank you everyone so much for joining today. We had over 100 people when I checked at one point, which is kind of crazy, but amazing. So thank you all for all of the amazing work that you do for our territory. And we're excited to read some applications and see some great programs.
I echo what Beth said, and please do reach out if you have additional questions.
Yeah, and I'll just leave our emails up here in case anyone wants to jot them down. But we'll monitor the Q&A for a couple more minutes. Love all the little claps and thumbs up.
I love
That's
that.
so cute. I've never actually hosted a webinar on this side, so this is like our first time seeing it on this end, so that's
Oh,
great.
that's lovely.
Yes, Sophia, we'll be sending out the recording via email and we'll also put it on the website. All right, I'm not seeing any more questions. Oh, Rachel, I'm glad the reminder emails are helpful. Do you work with the USDA for agricultural funding to purchase land? We, no, we do work with the USDA. We'll have some stuff coming out in the next, year, I'll say. But nothing that can be used to purchase land specifically. Thank you, Essa. Thanks for joining. Sandra, I can see that your hand is raised. I don't know if you're able to pop it into the chat, or sorry, into the Q&A if you have a question. Yes, Elaine, you're probably right. CDBG grants might be a better source of funding for land. So in response to that land question. Oh, no worries, Sandra. Is there a ballpark figure on how many proposals can be funded? Not really, because we just don't know what we're gonna get, right? In the past, we've gotten, gosh, over 50 proposals for this funding. And people are requested at all different levels. So we can't really give you a ballpark figure, just that you can request up to 10,000. Can we use funds for rental of space for the organization? Yeah, I think this goes back to kind of justifying your expenses. So if you're running a program in maybe your building or in a venue that you need to pay for, then sure, that would be an allowable and eligible expense, but you would need to justify it in your budget narrative and explain why it's critical to the project. All right, well, we're 5 minutes over and it looks like most folks have logged off. I'm not seeing any new questions come in. Oh, we got one question. Can we use funds to purchase and provide food to students? Sure, just like the venue space expense question, it's the same thing. It would be allowable because this is not federal funding. You know, there aren't really many things that would not be allowed for using the money, but you just would have to justify it again. You know, why is it critical that you provide food to students through this program? Is this grant local or federal? This is a local grant, so the funder is Popular, Banco Popular.
Alrighty, I think there's still about 30 people still.
I know, just hanging out with us. I'm hungry. It's lunchtime, everybody. All right, thank
So thank
you.
you all so much.
Yeah, all right. Well, I think I'm gonna go ahead and close it out, but for anyone still hanging out, please feel free to email us and I'll be sending out the recording shortly. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.